The Intrepid cut through the darkness of space, leading the Fifth Fleet toward the distant Lumina system. During FTL travel, time seemed to stretch and compress. The crew kept to their routines, eating, sleeping, training, and preparing for what waited at their destination. Commander Eliza Hayes spent most of her time in the tactical center. Holographic displays surrounded her, showing simulations of the coming battle. Lieutenant Samantha Rivera worked beside her, both women fine-tuning their approach based on everything they knew about the Scourge. They always attack in this three-pronged formation, Rivera pointed out, manipulating the display. It's like they can't imagine anything else. That's because they're a hive mind, Eliza replied. They lack individual creativity, it's their weakness. Captain Morgan entered the tactical center, nodding to both officers. How are the simulations coming? We're making progress, Eliza said. The Scourge have patterns. Once we find them, we can exploit them. Morgan studied the display. And our chances? Better than they were yesterday, Rivera answered honestly. The ship's intercom activated. Bridge to Captain Morgan. Morgan tapped his communicator. Morgan here. Sir, we've received an updated transmission from Lumina 4. The colony's main shield has fallen. The Scourge have landed ground forces. The three officers exchanged glances. The situation was deteriorating faster than expected. Increase speed, Morgan ordered. Push the engines as hard as they can go. 2 decks below, Chief Engineer Greg Hoffman received the order with a grim expression. He turned to his team. You heard the captain. I need every bit of power these engines can give. Sir, we're already at 110% of rated capacity, one engineer protested. Then make it 115%, Hoffman replied. Those people don't have time for us to play it safe. In the medical bay, Dr. Catherine Wells and her staff were preparing for casualties. The doctor had little experience with Astrian physiology, but she had studied everything available in the ship's database. Their bodies are semi-solid light, she explained to her team. They have no blood as we understand it, but they can still suffer trauma. They're extremely sensitive to certain energy frequencies. A young medic raised his hand. How do we treat them? Very carefully, Wells answered. And we'll learn fast. On the second day of their journey, the fleet's 7 ships maintained perfect formation despite their increased speed. The captains met via holographic conference, with Captain Morgan leading the discussion from the Intrepid. Latest intelligence suggests 30 Scourge vessels in the Lumina system, Morgan informed them. Our arrival time is now estimated at 48 hours. Captain Olivia Daniels of the destroyer Valiant looked concerned. The odds aren't great. When have they ever been? Replied Captain John Martinez of the cruiser Defiant. We've faced worse. The key will be protecting the civilian population, Morgan continued. Commander Hayes has developed a plan that gives us the best chance at both defeating the Scourge and saving the colonists. Eliza stepped forward. We'll deploy Marine forces to secure the main colony center while our ships engage the Scourge fleet. If we can disrupt their command structure, their ground forces will lose coordination. After the meeting, Morgan and Eliza walked through the ship's corridors, inspecting preparations. Marines checked their equipment. Weapon systems were calibrated. Every crew member moved with purpose. The Astrians have never trusted us, Morgan said quietly. None of the Alliance really has. Can you blame them? Eliza asked. Humans have a violent history. Yes, we do, Morgan agreed. But we also have something they need right now. What's that? Experience fighting to survive against impossible odds. In the ship's mess hall, Marine squads gathered around tables, studying maps of the Astrian colony. Major Frank Daniels led the briefing. The colony has 3 main sectors, he explained. The Scourge will likely focus on the research facilities. In the northern sector, that's where the Astrians keep their most advanced technology. What about gravity? Asked Sergeant Diane Perry. The reports say it's much lower than Earth standard. About 40% of what we're used to, Daniels confirmed. We've adjusted our combat simulations accordingly. It gives us some advantages. We can jump higher, carry more gear. but it also changes how our weapons perform. The Marines spent hours practicing movements in the ship's variable gravity training room. They adjusted their fighting styles for an environment where a small push could send someone flying. As the fleet entered its final day of travel, tension built throughout the ships. Everyone knew what waited for them, a desperate fight against an enemy that showed no mercy. Commander Hayes couldn't sleep. She stood in the observation lounge watching the streaks of light created by FTL travel. Captain Morgan found her there. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be challenging." "I know," she replied. "I keep thinking about the Astrians, an entire colony of beings who never evolved to deal with violence or war. How terrifying this must be for them." Morgan nodded. "That's why we're going. We know what it's like to face extinction. We've spent our entire history fighting, first against our world, then against each other, and now against the darkness between stars. The Alliance calls us Deathworlders like it's something to be ashamed of," Eliza said. "Maybe after tomorrow, they'll see it differently." The alarm sounded throughout the ship exactly 6 hours before their scheduled arrival. Emergency lights flashed in every corridor. "All hands to battle stations," announced the ship's AI. "This is not a drill. Preparing for early exit from FTL." On the bridge, Captain Morgan stood at the center of controlled chaos. "Report. Sir, we've detected an Astrian escape pod directly in our path," the sensors officer replied. "It appears heavily damaged." "Drop us out of FTL," Morgan ordered. "Prepare recovery teams." The Intrepid shuddered as it returned to normal space. Stars appeared as points of light again instead of streaks. The rest of the fleet followed, forming a protective perimeter. A small, glowing object drifted in the void ahead of them. The escape pod was barely larger than a human shuttle, its surface cracked and scorched. "Life signs?" Morgan asked. "Confirmed. At least 3 Astrians inside," replied the sensor officer. "They're weak but alive." "Bring them aboard," Morgan ordered. "Dr. Wells, prepare to receive injured Astrians in Shuttle Bay 2. Commander Hayes joined the medical team in the shuttle bay. When the pod was safely secured inside the ship, its hatch opened with a hiss of escaping air. Light poured out, not from artificial sources, but from the bodies of the Astrians themselves. 3 beings floated from the pod. They were roughly human-shaped but seemed to be made of glowing mist contained within a thin membrane. Their light pulsed weakly, shifting between blue and purple hues. The lead Astrian approached Hayes. Its form flickered like a candle in wind. "You came," it said, its voice sounding like chimes in the ship's translation system. "The Alliance said you would not." "We received your distress call," Hayes replied. "We're here to help." "It may be too late," the Astrian said. "The colony, our people." "Tell us what happened," Captain Morgan said as he entered the shuttle bay. The Astrian's light dimmed further. "The scourge came without warning. Our shields failed quickly. They seek our photonic technology and our essence. Already half the colony is gone." "And the Alliance peacekeepers?" Hayes asked. "Still days away." The Astrian's light brightened, slightly as it looked at the humans surrounding it. "You are our only hope now." Morgan turned to Hayes. "Prepare the fleet. We move immediately." As the 7 human warships accelerated toward Lumina 4, the rescued Astrians watched with wonder. From the medical bay, they had heard stories about the dangerous humans from Earth, but had never expected to witness their ferocity directed at an enemy on their behalf. The Intrepid's weapon systems came online. Marines checked their gear one final time. Engineer Hoffman pushed the engines beyond their limits. The Deathworlders were going to war. The stars looked cold and distant from the observation deck of the Earth Defense Fleet headquarters. Commander Eliza Hayes stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the ships come and go. Earth's fleet wasn't the largest in the galaxy, but their ships were known for being tough and reliable, just like humans themselves. The Galactic Alliance had a name for Earth: Deathworld. It wasn't meant as a compliment. Most alien species evolved on gentle planets with mild weather, few predators, and stable environments. Humans came from a world that tried to kill them every day. High gravity that crushed bones, storms that flattened cities. Diseases that adapted, faster than medicine. Humans survived it all, and that made other species nervous. Commander Hayes, Admiral Scott needs you in the command center immediately. Eliza turned away from the viewport. On my way, she said to the young officer who had delivered the message. As she walked through the hallways, crew members stepped aside respectfully. At 37, Eliza had earned her reputation as one of the fleet's sharpest tactical minds. The command center buzzed with unusual activity when she arrived. Admiral William Scott stood at the central holographic display, his weathered face illuminated by the blue light of star charts. "Commander," he acknowledged as she approached, "we've received something unexpected." With a gesture, he expanded a section of the display. A distress signal, represented by a pulsing red dot, appeared in a far sector of Alliance space. "The Astrians are calling for help," Admiral Scott said. Eliza raised an eyebrow. The Astrians were one of the oldest members of the Galactic Alliance. Their species evolved on a low-gravity moon system and developed into beings of semi-solid, light, beautiful, peaceful, and brilliant scientists, but physically fragile. They had always kept their distance from humans. "They're specifically asking for our help?" Eliza asked, surprised. "Yes. Their colony on Lumina 4 is under attack by the Scourge." The room grew quieter at the mention of the Scourge. Everyone knew about them, a nomadic hive mind species that traveled across the galaxy harvesting biological and technological resources. They left empty planets behind them. "Where are the Alliance peacekeeping forces?" Eliza asked. 2 weeks out at minimum," Scott replied. "By then there won't be anything left to save." Eliza studied the tactical display. "We could get the 5th Fleet there in 3 days." "That's why I called you," Scott said. "I'm putting you on the mission. You'll coordinate with Captain Morgan on the Intrepid as Fleet Tactical Officer." Eliza's mind was already calculating probabilities, resources, tactical approaches. "The Scourge travel in large numbers. We'll be outnumbered." "Yes, we will," Scott agreed. "But the 5th Fleet has faced worse odds before." He brought up another display showing the 7 warships that made up the 5th Fleet. The Intrepid was the flagship, a battle cruiser built with the practical efficiency that had become humanity's trademark. No wasted space, no decorative elements, just armor, weapons, and redundant systems for when things inevitably went wrong. "The Alliance Council has never asked for our help directly," Eliza noted. "They've always been afraid of what we might do if given free rein in their territory." Admiral Scott's mouth formed a grim line. "Fear and desperation make strange allies, Commander. The Astrians are out of options." A communications officer approached with a datapad. "Sir, we've received additional details from Lumina 4. The colony has approximately 30,000 civilians. Their defensive systems are failing. The Scourge began their attack 26 hours ago." Scott reviewed the information, then looked up at Eliza. "You have 6 hours to prepare. The 5th Fleet departs at 1800 hours. "Yes, sir," Eliza replied. As she turned to leave, Scott added, "Commander Hayes, the diplomatic implications of this mission can't be overstated. How we respond could change humanity's standing in the galaxy." "I understand, sir." 4 hours later, Eliza boarded the shuttle that would take her to the Intrepid. The massive ship hung in orbit, its dark hull highlighted by the glow of Earth below. The shuttle bay was busy with last-minute preparations, supplies being loaded, personnel rushing to their stations. Captain Alan Morgan met her at the airlock. He was tall with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Commander Hayes," he greeted her with a firm handshake. "Welcome aboard." "Captain," she nodded. "Thank you for the warm welcome under such pressing circumstances." The crews, eager to get moving, Morgan said as they walked through the corridors. "News about the Astrians has spread fast." They entered the bridge where officers worked at their stations with calm efficiency. Lieutenant Samantha Rivera, the ship's tactical officer, stood from her console. "Commander, I've prepared the initial tactical assessments based on the latest intelligence," Rivera said, transferring data to Eliza's tablet. Eliza glanced through the information. "Good work, Lieutenant. We'll need to refine this as we get closer and have better sensor data on the Scourge formations." Captain Morgan called the bridge to attention. All stations prepare for departure. Engineering, status? Chief Engineer. Greg Hoffman's voice came through the comm system. Engines at full capacity, Captain, all systems green. Medical? Dr. Catherine Wells responded. Medical bay is prepared for casualties, Captain. We've added extra supplies for potential Astrian patients. Tactical? Lieutenant Rivera answered. Weapons charged and ready. Combat simulations running for anticipated scourge formations. Morgan nodded with satisfaction. Communications. Send word to Admiral Scott. The Intrepid is ready to depart. Eliza took her position at the tactical planning station as the massive engines of the warship hummed to life. Around them, the other 6 ships of the Fifth Fleet moved into formation. Course plotted for the Lumina system, the navigation officer announced. FTL engines spooled and ready. Captain Morgan settled into his command chair. All ships prepare for FTL jump on my mark. He paused, looking at the view screen showing Earth growing smaller. Mark. Space distorted around the fleet as the FTL drives engaged. The stars stretched into lines of light and Earth vanished behind them. The journey had begun. In the quiet of her quarters that evening, Eliza reviewed everything known about the Scourge, their biology, their tactics, their weaknesses. The information was limited. The Alliance had lost most engagements against them. She opened a channel to Lieutenant Rivera. Sam, run simulation variant 12 again, but this time adjust our formation to account for the low-gravity environment near Lumina 4. On it, Commander, Rivera replied. Should I factor in the Astrians' defensive capabilities? Based on the reports, I wouldn't count on them offering much resistance by the time we arrive, Eliza said. But yes, include what they have. Every bit helps. As the ship hurtled through space toward an uncertain battle, Eliza felt a strange sense of purpose. Humanity had always been viewed as dangerous by the galactic community, violent, unpredictable creatures from a hostile world. Now, those same qualities might be exactly what was needed. The Scourge was about to learn what it meant to face Deathworlders in combat. Admiral Scott stood in the command center of Earth Defense Fleet headquarters, watching the battle unfold through the long-range communication system. Reports came in from Captain Morgan every hour. The Admiral's face remained calm, but inside, he felt a mixture of pride and worry for his people. Sir, his aide said, the Alliance Council is requesting an update on our operations at Lumina 4. Scott smiled slightly. Tell them our forces are engaged and the evacuation is proceeding. The aide hesitated. They're asking if we plan to withdraw once the Alliance peacekeepers arrive. Tell them that when their peacekeepers finally get there, we'll discuss it. In orbit around Lumina before, the battle had reached its turning point. The human fleet had formed a defensive perimeter around the damaged Sentinel. The Scourge command ship, though wounded by the Intrepid's precise strike, continued to direct its forces in the attack. On the bridge of the Intrepid, Commander Hayes studied the pattern of the Scourge movements. Something had changed. Their coordinated attacks were becoming less effective, almost confused. Captain, she said to Morgan, look at this. The Scourge ships are starting to lose formation. Their movements are becoming erratic. Morgan watched the tactical display. You're right. What's happening? Lieutenant Rivera looked up from her console. Sir, I think I understand. When we damaged their command ship, we disrupted their hive mind network. They're having trouble coordinating their forces. Morgan's eyes lit up with understanding. They think as one mind. Cut off the head and the body falters. He opened a channel to the fleet. All ships focus fire on the command ship. This is our chance. The 7 human vessels, though damaged and strained, responded with everything they had left. Energy beams, railguns, and missiles all targeted the Scourge command vessel. Its shields flickered under the assault. Their shields are failing, Rivera reported. One more concentrated volley should do it. Morgan nodded. All weapons, fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, I fire. The combined firepower of the human fleet struck the Scourge command ship at once. For a moment, the massive vessel seemed to absorb the attack. Then explosions began to chain across its hull. Internal systems detonated in a cascade of destruction. The ship broke apart, pieces drifting in different directions. The effect on the remaining Scourge vessels was immediate and dramatic. Some stopped moving entirely. Others began flying in random patterns. A few turned and fled the system. "They've lost central control," Hayes said with satisfaction. "Without the hive mind to direct them, they don't know what to do." Morgan allowed himself a small smile. "Inform all ships. Target the remaining Scourge vessels one by one. Don't let any escape." On the surface of Lumina 4, Major Daniels and his Marines noticed the change too. The Scourge drones that had been attacking in perfect coordination suddenly became disorganized. Some stopped moving entirely, others wandered aimlessly or attacked in random directions. "What's happening to them?" Sergeant Perry asked as she watched a Scourge drone walk in circles. Daniels checked his comm unit. "Message from the Intrepid. They destroyed the Scourge command ship. The drones have lost connection to the hive mind. The Marines took advantage of the enemy's confusion. They pushed forward rapidly, reaching the secondary colony site where thousands of Astrians waited for rescue. Unlike the scientists at the research facility, these were ordinary civilians, families, workers, children. Their bodies glowed with fear and hope as the humans approached. "Transport ships are on the way," Daniels told them. "You're going to be safe now." An Astrian child floated forward, its small body pulsing with curious blue light. It reached out and touched Daniel's armor with a tendril of energy. "You are not like the stories," the child said. "They said humans were dangerous." Daniels knelt down to the child's level. "We can be dangerous when we need to be, especially to those who threaten the innocent." The evacuation continued through the day and into the night. Transport ships came and went, carrying Astrians to safety aboard the waiting human vessels. The Dauntless, the largest ship in the fleet, had converted its fighter bays into temporary living quarters for the refugees. As the last transport prepared to leave the surface, Major Daniels did a final sweep of the area. He found an Astrian elder in what had been a library, gathering data crystals that contained the colony's history and knowledge. "The last ship is leaving," Daniels told the elder. "We need to go." The Astrian's light flickered with sadness. "This was to be a permanent colony, a new home for our people. Now it is lost." Daniels helped gather the remaining crystals. "Not lost, just postponed. Once the Scourge are dealt with, you can rebuild." "With what protection?" "The Alliance peacekeepers failed us." "Perhaps it's time for a new arrangement," Daniel suggested, "one that includes Earth." 2 days later, the Alliance peacekeeping fleet finally arrived. Their sleek, beautiful ships entered the Lumina system cautiously. What they found surprised them. The space around Lumina 4 was littered with the wreckage of Scourge vessels. The human fleet, though damaged, remained in position. The Astrian civilians had been safely evacuated to the human ships. On the bridge of the Intrepid, Captain Morgan received a transmission from the Alliance commander. "Human vessels, this is Commander Thrix of the Alliance peacekeeping force. We are here to assume control of the situation." Morgan glanced at Hayes before responding. "Commander Thrix, this is Captain Morgan of the Earth Defense Fleet. The situation is already under control. The Scourge forces have been defeated. The Astrian civilians are safe aboard our vessels." There was a pause before the Alliance commander replied. "I see. We were informed that your mission was simply to delay the Scourge until our arrival." "Our mission was to save lives," Morgan replied simply, "which we have done." In the temporary quarters aboard the Dauntless, the Astrian elder, who had been rescued from the library, approached Commander Hayes. "Our council has been in discussion," the elder said, its light now strong and steady. "We wish to formally thank Earth for its assistance." Hayes nodded. "We responded to your call for help. Anyone would have done the same." The Astrian's light pulsed with what Hayes had come to recognize as gentle amusement. "No, Commander. Not anyone would have done what you did. The Alliance has always feared your kind, the Deathworlders who evolved in such harsh conditions." "And now?" Hayes asked. "Now we see that sometimes those who know death best are the strongest defenders of life." The elder extended a tendril of light. "We will speak for Earth in the Alliance Council. It is time for humans to take their rightful place among the stars. 1 week later, the fleet returned to Earth. The ships bore the scars of battle, hull plates scorched and dented, systems running on backup power, supplies exhausted, but they had returned with something more important than an undamaged fleet. Admiral Scott greeted Captain Morgan and Commander Hayes as they disembarked from the Intrepid. "The Alliance Council has sent a formal message of thanks," Scott told them. Apparently, the Astrians were quite insistent about it. "We just did our job, sir," Morgan replied. Scott smiled. "You did more than that. You showed the galaxy what humanity really is. Yes, we're Deathworlders. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every day. But that's what makes us who we are. We know what it means to fight for survival. And we'll fight just as hard for others as we do for ourselves." As the 3 officers walked through the station, crew members and civilians alike stopped to applaud. News of what the Fifth Fleet had accomplished had spread quickly. The story of how Earth's ships had answered an alien distress call when no one else would. How the dangerous Deathworlders had risked everything to save a species they barely knew. The Alliance would never look at humans the same way again. And somewhere in the galaxy, the next time a peaceful species found itself threatened, they would know exactly who to call. The Deathworlders would answer. The battle for Lumina 4 raged across space and on the moon's surface. The Intrepid shook as another Scourge energy blast struck its shields. On the bridge, Commander Hayes gripped her console to stay upright. "Shields at 47%, reported the defense officer. "We can't take much more of this." Captain Morgan studied the tactical display. The human fleet was surrounded by Scourge vessels. They had destroyed 4 enemy ships and damaged several others, but the remaining Scourge forces still outnumbered them. "What's the status of the evacuation?" Morgan asked. Hayes checked the reports from the surface. "Major Daniels has secured the main research facility. 200 Astrian civilians are ready for transport, but there are thousands more scattered across the colony." Morgan made a quick decision. "Tell the Dauntless to move closer to the planet. Their hangar bay is large enough to take on civilians while their fighters provide cover." "Sir?" Rivera interrupted. "I'm detecting a new energy pattern from the largest Scourge vessel. It appears to be charging some kind of primary weapon." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "Target that ship. All available weapons." The Intrepid and Relentless both turned their main guns toward the Scourge command ship. Energy beams and railgun projectiles streaked across space. The Scourge vessel's shields flared under the assault. "Their shields are holding," Rivera reported. 10 seconds until their weapon fires." Morgan opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, evasive maneuvers." The human vessels scattered as the Scourge weapon discharged, a massive beam of energy that cut through the space where they had been moments before. The edge of the beam caught the destroyer Sentinel, overloading its shields instantly. "Sentinel reports heavy damage," Hayes said. "They've lost engines and weapons, but life support is still functioning." Morgan gritted his teeth. "Have the Guardian move to protect them while they make repairs." On the surface of Lumina 4, Major Daniels led a group of Astrians toward the waiting transport ships. The aliens moved slowly, their light-based bodies weakened by the attack. Marines formed a protective perimeter around them. "Hostiles approaching from the east," warned Sergeant Perry over the comm. "At least 30 Scourge drones," Daniels signaled to his troops. "Form a defensive line, get the civilians to the transports." The Marines took positions behind broken pieces of buildings and fallen structures. The sergeant checked her ammunition. "I'm down to my last 2 magazines," she told Daniels. He handed her some of his own ammo. "Make every shot count." The Scourge drones came into view, moving in perfect formation, their insectoid bodies flowing across the landscape like a dark wave. The Marines opened fire. In the low gravity, the recoil from their weapons pushed them back more than they were used to, but they had trained for this. Several drones fell, but more kept coming. One Marine activated a portable shield generator, creating a barrier of energy that blocked the enemy's return fire. Daniels noticed something strange. They keep focusing on the Astrians with the brightest glow. They're targeting the scientists and leaders. An Astrian elder floated next to him, their light pulsing weakly. They seek our knowledge, our essence. We have technologies they wish to absorb. Above them, a human transport ship descended from the sky, its engines roaring. It landed in a clear area, and the ramp lowered. "Move the civilians to the ship," Daniels ordered. "First group only. We'll hold off the Scourge." As the Astrians moved toward the transport, the Scourge attack intensified. Several drones broke through the Marine line and charged toward the civilians. Sergeant Perry leaped into their path, using her jump jets to launch herself high into the air. In the low gravity, she soared above the drones and fired downward, taking out 3 before she landed. Another Marine wasn't so lucky. A Scourge energy weapon caught him in the chest, burning through his armor. He fell with a cry of pain. "Man, down!" someone shouted. Daniels ran to the fallen Marine, firing his rifle with one hand while dragging his wounded comrade with the other. The low gravity made this possible, but it was still difficult. Medical Officer Joe Carter ran forward to help. "Get him to the transport, I'll treat him there." In orbit, the space battle reached a critical point. The Scourge command ship was preparing to fire its main weapon again. "Their firing chamber is charging," Rivera warned. 90 seconds until they can fire." Commander Hayes studied the tactical display, looking for a weakness. "There," she said, suddenly pointing to a section of the enemy vessel. "Their shield generator. It's cycling power before the weapon fires." Morgan understood immediately. "Lieutenant, target these coordinates. Time your shot for their shield cycle." Rivera programmed the targeting computers. The weapons officers stood ready. "Shield cycle beginning," Rivera announced. 3, 2, 1, now. The Intrepid's main guns fired. The energy beams struck the Scourge ship at precisely the point Hayes had identified at exactly the moment when the shields were weakest. There was a flash of light as the beams penetrated the hull. For a moment, nothing happened. Then secondary explosions rippled across the Scourge vessel. Its charging weapon, beam sputtered and died. "Direct hit to their power core," Rivera reported, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "Their main weapon is disabled." The bridge crew cheered, but Morgan raised his hand for silence. "Stay focused. We've hurt them, but this fight isn't over." On the surface, the first transport ship lifted off, carrying Astrian civilians to safety. Major Daniels watched it rise, then turned to the remaining Marines. "First group away. Now we move to the secondary colony site. There are thousands more civilians there." An explosion nearby threw dirt and debris into the air. The Scourge were adjusting their tactics using heavier weapons against the human forces. "They're learning," Sergeant Perry said. "Adapting to our methods." Daniels nodded grimly. "So will we. That's what humans do." He opened his comm channel to the fleet. "This is Major Daniels to Captain Morgan. First evacuation successful. Moving to secondary site now, but Scourge resistance is increasing. We need air support." On the Intrepid, Morgan received the message. "Acknowledged, Major. Help is on the way." He turned to Hayes. "Commander, take tactical command of our fighter squadrons. Give our ground forces the support they need." Hayes moved to the fighter control station. "All squadrons, this is Commander Hayes. I need strike teams Alpha and Bravo to provide close air support for our ground forces at these coordinates. The rest of you continue to engage the Scourge ships." In the darkness of space, human fighters changed course, diving toward the planet's atmosphere. They were small compared to the main ships, but fast and heavily armed. The Scourge tried to intercept them, but the human pilots flew with a creativity and boldness that confused the hive-mind opponents. Where other Alliance pilots followed standard patterns, humans improvised, taking risks that seemed illogical but often succeeded. One pilot, Susan Martinez, rolled her fighter between 2 Scourge vessels, causing them to fire at each other rather than at her. Another pilot, Rick Johnson, flew directly at a Scourge ship, firing all weapons before pulling up at the last possible moment. As the fighters entered the atmosphere, Major Daniels saw them coming and pointed them out to his troops. "See that? The cavalry has arrived." The Scourge drones looked up as shadows passed overhead. Human fighters screamed across the sky, energy weapons and missiles striking the Scourge positions with deadly accuracy. "Push forward," Daniels ordered. "The next group of civilians is waiting for us." The Marines advanced, their spirits lifted by the air support. Sergeant Perry led her squad through the ruins of what had been a beautiful Istrian structure. The low gravity allowed them to leap over obstacles and attack from unexpected angles. The Scourge were powerful and numerous, but the humans fought with something the hive mind couldn't understand: individual initiative and the fierce determination of a species that had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day. And for the first time since the battle began, the humans were winning. The fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Lumina system. The sudden shift from faster-than-light travel back to normal space made some crew members dizzy. Commander Eliza Hayes steadied herself against her console on the bridge of the Intrepid. The view screen showed the scene ahead. Lumina 44 was a small moon orbiting a gas giant. From this distance it looked peaceful, a sphere of soft blue light. But as the sensors zoomed in, the truth became clear. Dozens of dark ships surrounded the moon like hungry predators. The Scourge had arrived in force. 32 Scourge vessels detected, Lieutenant Rivera reported. They're focusing their attack on the northern continent where the main Istrian research facilities are located. Captain Morgan stood from his command chair. Any response to our arrival? 3 Scourge ships have broken off and are moving to intercept us, Rivera answered. They'll be in weapons range in 5 minutes. Morgan nodded calmly. Just as we expected, all hands prepare for combat, launch fighter squadrons. Throughout the Intrepid and the other 6 ships of the human fleet, alert sirens sounded. Pilots ran to their fighters. Weapons crews checked their systems. In the engine room, Chief Hoffman diverted power from non-essential systems to shields and weapons. Commander Hayes moved to the tactical station. The Scourge don't know us. They've never fought humans before. That gives us an advantage. Let's hope it's enough, Morgan replied. He opened a channel to the fleet. All ships assume Delta formation. Remember the plan. We need to punch through their line and reach the colony. The 7 human ships moved into position. Unlike the elegant vessels of other Alliance species, human ships were built with practicality in mind. They were blocky and heavily armored, with weapons placed for maximum coverage. The destroyers Valiant and Sentinel took the forward positions. The cruisers Defiant and Guardian protected the flanks. The carrier Dauntless stayed in the center, launching its fighters. The battle cruisers Intrepid and Relentless provided heavy firepower from the core of the formation. Scourge ships entering weapons range in 30 seconds, Rivera announced. Captain Morgan's eyes narrowed. Hold fire until my command. Let them make the first move. The lead Scourge vessel fired. A beam of sickly green energy that struck the Valiant's forward shields. Shields holding at 82%, came the report from the Valiant. Morgan's voice was steady. All ships return fire. Target their propulsion systems. The human fleet responded with a coordinated barrage. Railguns fired hypervelocity projectiles. Energy. Weapons sent blue-white beams slicing through space. Missile launchers released swarms of guided weapons that adjusted their course as they flew. The Scourge ships tried to evade, but the human attack came from too many directions at once. 1 Scourge vessel shuddered as multiple impacts tore through its engines. It began to drift. First target disabled, Rivera reported with satisfaction, but the other Scourge ships pressed their attack. The bridge of the Intrepid shook as enemy fire struck their shields. Shield strength down to 73%, reported the defense officer. More. Scourge vessels were breaking away from the planet to join the fight. Soon the human fleet would be outnumbered 5-1. Launch the Marine dropships, Morgan ordered. While we engage their fleet, Major Daniels and his team will head for the surface. In the launch bay, Major Frank Daniels led his Marines into the waiting dropships. Each soldier carried combat armor designed for low-gravity environments and weapons modified to work in Lumina 4's atmosphere. Remember your training, Daniels told his troops. The gravity down there is less than half of Earth normal. Control your movements. Short bursts of your jump jets only. Sergeant Diane Perry checked her squad's equipment one last time. What about the Istrians, sir? How do we avoid hurting them in the crossfire? They emit light in blue and purple wavelengths, Daniels explained. The Scourge drones are dark green and black. If it glows, it's friendly. If it doesn't, shoot it. The dropships detached from the Intrepid and accelerated toward the planet. The Scourge noticed the small vessels and tried to intercept them, but fighters from the Dauntless moved to protect the vulnerable transports. Above the planet, the space battle intensified. The Scourge employed tactics that had worked against other Alliance species, electromagnetic pulse weapons designed to disable ship systems. But human vessels were built with redundant systems and heavy shielding against such attacks. EMP burst detected, warned the Intrepid sensors officer. Switch to backup systems, Morgan ordered calmly. When the pulse hit, some lights flickered, but the ship's weapons and shields remained online. The Scourge vessels seemed to hesitate, confused by the lack of effect. They expected us to be disabled, Hayes observed. Now they don't know what to do. Morgan smiled grimly. Let's take advantage of their confusion. All ships, press the attack. The human fleet surged forward. On the tactical display, Hayes watched as the Marine dropships entered Lumina 4's atmosphere. The first stage of the plan was working. Major Daniels braced himself as the dropship shook during its descent. Through the viewport, he could see the colony below, elegant structures of crystalline material that caught and reflected light. Many buildings were damaged or destroyed. Dark shapes moved through the streets, Scourge ground troops hunting for Astrian survivors. 30 seconds to landing, announced the pilot. Daniels checked his rifle one last time. Lock and load, he told his Marines. The dropship touched down in a central plaza. The doors opened and the Marines moved out in practiced formation. The lower gravity made each step feel strange, too light, too bouncy, but they had trained for this. Contact right, shouted a Marine as the first Scourge drones appeared. The Scourge ground troops resembled large insects, six-limbed with armored carapaces and multiple eyes. They moved with eerie coordination, like parts of a single organism rather than individual creatures. The Marines opened fire. Their weapons had been calibrated to work in the alien atmosphere, firing high-velocity rounds that punctured the Scourge armor. The drones returned fire with energy weapons that left scorch marks on the plaza floor. Sergeant Perry used her jump jets to leap to a higher position, a move that would have been impossible in Earth gravity. From her vantage point, she picked off 3 Scourge drones in quick succession. Main research facility is 200 meters north, Daniels said over the comm. That's our primary objective. The Astrians said many of their scientists are trapped inside. The Marines pushed forward, using the strange gravity to their advantage. They could jump higher, move faster, and carry more ammunition than the Scourge expected. For creatures that relied on predictable enemy responses, the human style of combat was confusing and chaotic. Inside the research facility, a group of Astrians huddled in a sealed room. Their bodies glowed with frightened blue light. They could hear the sounds of fighting drawing closer. The Scourge are almost through the door, one Astrian said, their voice trembling. Another Astrian moved closer to the sealed door. Wait, those are not Scourge weapons. That sounds different. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it from the outside. The Astrians moved back in fear. Then a voice called out, translated by their systems into something they could understand. Astrian personnel, this is Major Daniels of the Earth Defense Fleet. We're here to evacuate you. Please stand away from the door. The Astrians looked at each other in shock. Humans? Here? The door burst open and human Marines entered the room. Their armor was scorched and dented from battle, but they moved with purpose and discipline. Major Daniels stepped forward, his helmet retracting to show his face. We received your distress call. We're here to get you to safety. An Astrian elder floated forward, their light brightening with hope. The Alliance said help was weeks away. Daniels smiled slightly. We're not the Alliance, we're humans, and we don't leave people behind.